Hey, Beth, what's going on, y'all? Back with another one. We are in contractualism. Let me get the link set up, and I'll be right with y'all. Let me get my head on straight. Yeah, yeah. Get my head on straight. Dealing with some technical difficulties, but we are what we are. So yeah, I gotta get this bullshit underway. Ugh. Yeah. Hold on for a minute. Yeah, just trying to work on a little something. I'll deal with it later. Oh, it's getting on my nerves. Okay. Yeah, I received some stuff in the mail. Yeah, I'll get it under the way. All right. Salute, Psycho Candy. Salute. Yeah, I'm trying to get this out the way. Yeah. So what we're going to talk about is the actual, and I think we're going to talk about the contractualism and punishment by the Taylor Francis Online, .com. This talks about the social contract we talked about last week, and we talked about it on the Wednesday stream. And it's a subversion of contractarianism. I mean, contractarianism, and this is kind of like the social contract in its emphasis. And so we're going to do some reading, and we're going to talk about the ethical parts and punishment, laws, and how it gets into this ideology. So basically, we're just saying we're going to read it from that perspective. So I'm not really worried about anything else. So we're gonna deal with that in time. So we're gonna put this down. Paste. I'm gonna copy. Yeah, paste it. Hold on for a minute. Yeah, we're gonna get into the reading for the moment. So we're gonna copy it and paste it. Okay, that's for later. Anybody wants to challenge what I'm saying? Okay, so we're gonna get into it. Let's share the screen for a minute. We're gonna get to the nitty gritty. We enough pussyfooting around. All right. Here we go. We right at it. Okay, abstract. Tim Scandalon's contractualism is a meta ethical theory that explains moral motivation and also provides a conception of how to carry out moral deliberation. It supports non consequentialism, but the theory that both consequence and deontological considerations are morally significant in moral deliberation. Regarding the issue of punishment, non consequentialism allows us to take account of the need of deterrence as well as principles of fairness, justice, and even desert. Moreover, the Scandalonian contractualism accounts for permissibility in terms of justifiability, and an act is permissible if only if it can be justified to everyone affected by it. This contractualist thesis explains why is it always impermissible to frame an innocent person, why vicariously punishment is immersible, and why has there to be a cap on sentences. Contractualism therefore allows us to take deterrence as a goal of punishment the without the excess of utilitarianism. Here we go. This paper further argues that the resulting view is superior to pure retributivism. Finally, it shows why legal excuses and mitigation can be justified in terms of the notions of negative desert. So we're going to get to this part. Okay, TMM Scandalon's contractualism is a meta-ethical of the second order theory that explains permissibility in terms of justifiability and is act permissible if any only it can be justified to everyone affected by it, but thus understood as impermissible act is one which we have reasonable not to perform insofar as we wish to govern ourselves on terms that others could not reasonably reject, and insofar as they are motivated by this ideal, because we care about whether our acts are justifiable to others on grounds that they cannot reasonably reject. This theory provides an explanation as how moral motivation is possible. Moreover, Scandalonian contractualism also provides a plausible conception of how to carry out moral deliberation and how to resolve first order moral issues. The conception supports non-consequentialism of the theory that both consequences and deontological considerations are relevant factors to be taken into account in moral deliberation. While Scandalonian contractualism is a form of hypothetical contractualism, with the best known contemporary version of hypothetical contractualism is John Rawls, we talked about him last week, argument from the original position despite its importance. Rawls' theory is not a suitable basis on which to ground morality. First, Rawls intends his theory to be one of his social justice, but the subject matter to which Rawls' theory applies is the basic structure of society, not morally actions as such. Second, whereas according to Rawls' theory, principles of justice distribute primary social goods, but it's doubtful whether they are morally primary goods. But thus, even if Rawls' theory is correct, it is too limited to the ground of all of morality. I shall put forth a partial theory of punishment within its framework of Scandalonian contractualism. There are two reasons for doing so. Scandalonian contractualism supports non-consequentialism, but the theory that both consequences and deontological considerations are relevant in moral deliberation, because non-consequentialism can accommodate both consequences and deontological considerations. A non-consequentialist theory of punishment has room for considerations of deterrence as well as those of fairness, justice, and even desert. Another reason is the Scandalonian contractualism has implications for first order moral problems in general. Scandalonian contractualism is committed to the fundamental thesis that an act is morally permissible if and only if it's justifiable to everyone affected by it. This thesis has direct implications for punishment because it sets limits on who should be punished and how much, and has relevance to the questions of whether certain forms of punishment are too cruel or unreasonable, should be excluded from the criminal justice system. And what follows, if it will be useful to keep track of the two different types of arguments at one level. The contractualist thesis that an act must be justified to all parties concerned supports various arguments on punishment. Yes, Scandalonian contractualism provides room with a non-algorithmic framework for the exploring first order arguments on punishment as well, because such of a kind of a non-algorithmic exploration involves phronesis and practical wisdom. It is possible that the two contractualists sharing the same ethical framework might have arrived at a different first order views on punishment. Contractualism introduction. Okay, we're gonna read this part. We'll see how long I'm reading this. Okay. Oh, damn, I can't find that little thing, but that's okay. Fuck it. We're gonna deal with that. Oh, I'm starting off bad, but I'll get used to it. I don't give a fuck because normally I hate Wednesday streams sometimes. Some bullshit always happens. Yeah. Y'all give me a second. Because this is getting on my nerves. The phone acting up and all that other shit. We'll deal with it. We'll deal when we get there. Yeah, it's a lot of bullshit going on. Yeah, we're gonna deal with that. We're gonna get it in post. So yeah, we'll get into it. We're not gonna worry about it. Keep the distractions low. All right, I want to see what time, much time we got. How much time we got? Okay, 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 okay. Oh, 10 minutes. Okay, one person in here. Good, good, good. Because nobody's not gonna come right through, right ahead. Yeah, it's a mess right now. So yeah, because once you read, they're gonna run. Yeah, we're gonna. I'm gonna read it. Fuck it. Scandalous strives to defend claims of individuals against aggravated reasoning. A utilitarian, for instance, is committed to the thesis of aggregation that an individual's life could be outweighed by trivial claims to alleviate the headaches held by other people if their number is sufficiently numerous. It seems how much that an individual life cannot be outweighed by other people's headaches, no matter how many people there are who want to have their headaches alleviate. Yet a utilitarian would disagree. Yeah, talking about a philosopher right here, utilitarian philosopher. Of course they would. Confronted with this problem, Scandalini points out that we must first understand why normative or first order utilitarianism still has its adherents despite its various highly counterintuitive implications. This phenomenon, Scandalon observes, has to do with the intuitive appeal of the meta-ethical or second order foundation of utilitarianism. Philosophical utilitarianism, which is a philosophical thesis about the subject matter of morality, namely that the only fundamental moral facts are facts about individuals' well-being in order to undermine the normative utilitarianism. Scandalon suggests we must sap the force of philosophical utilitarianism by offering a more plausible alternative meta-ethical theory. Scandalon's contractualism provides such as an alternative as a as a meta as a meta ethical theory. It informs us about what moral wrongness or im- impermissible consists in. But to arrive at the contractualism, two steps are necessary. First, the reference to moral wrongness has to do with the fact that we would feel remorse or self reproach if we do something that we regard as wrong. While an action may be wrong for different kinds of reason, the inner core morality has to do with what we have owed to each other. The realm of morality, in narrow sense of governing the kind of reasonable behavior that we expect each other's insofar as well we agree to treat others in a reasonable way. Morality in the broader impersonal sense, on the other hand, is concerned with the impersonal grounds or reasons that are not to tie to the well-being claims or status of individuals in any particular position. Morality in this broader sense covers the wrongness relating to non-persons such as non-human animals treating or natural sense that is crucial to our relations with each other. Okay. The second step is to best account for wrongness of the narrow sense or impersonability of Scandalon argues that utilitarianism does not account for our feeling remorse for fault for for failing for failing to aid to the needy in the Bangladesh for insurance. I mean, for Bangladesh, for instance, because the failing to maximize utility by itself does not account for our feeling remorse. Rather, we feel remorse because our failing to provide and aid is unjustifiable, and our inaction is disallowed by any set of principles for the general regulation of behavior that no one could reasonably reject as a basis of informed. Unforced general agreement, Scandalon strategy, is analogs to the strategy of a chemist who explains why the theory that gold has the atomic number 79 is more successful than our rival theories in accounting for the phenomenon properties of gold, such as being yellowish, heavy, and resistance to rust. Resistance to rust. Okay, my fault. It's up here. My fault. And now we are interested in finding out whether an act and performed in the circumstances is morally permissible or not. But to proceed, we are not to find out whether there are exists any principles which no one could reasonably reject and which would disallow. A is so we need to consider principles one by one, and there are any indefinite numbers of them. If there is a principle that no one could reasonably reject, that would disallowed, and then A is impermissible. In going through various principles, how do we know whether a principle P is reasonable, rejectable, or not a principle? Is the general conclusion about the status of various kinds of reasons for actions. In Scandalon's model, not all kinds of reasons have weight. But the reasons must firstly be generic reasons or reasons based on generally available information of what an individuals would want in certain situations, characterized in general terms rather than the detailed particular information which we do not usually know. This is so basically we want to be able to settle questions of right and wrong in an abstract sense that the particular identity of the individuals affected is irrelevant. Secondly, the generic reasons must be a personal generic reasons, which have to do with the claims and status of individuals in certain positions. Impersonal reasons fall aside the moral realm of what we owe to each other. To the appeal to individuals in generic reasons, we would need to know firstly how P would affect differently individuals' well-being, even though well-being is not only the thing that matters. But Scandalon's way of understanding departs from the consequences of welfarist model. For one thing, reasons for being concerned with how one is affected by the principle are not limited to reasons having to do with one welfare, such as one's wanting to be able to determine by one's choice whether some result is likely to occur. For example, there are reasons arising from the harmful effect caused if it in certain type of action is generally permitted. It might be that. As in the case of environmental damage, no individual actions on its own causes a harm to which anyone could object. But such kind of actions is still impermissible because of the consequences should be generally permitted and performed. Secondly, a general basis on which individuals could object to a principle is that it is unfair, unjust, or rigid. Thus, principles should be set aside if they violate valid considerations of fairness, justice, or perhaps even desert, as well as other deontological moral principles. Scandalonian's contractualism is often misunderstood. One common misunderstood is to interpret it as a first order normative theory that they're declaring what it makes the torturing babies is wrong. For instance, it is not the act of being reasonable, rejectable, but rather it's being a cruel act. Thus, interpretive Scandalon's contractualism would be viciously circular and redundant. Such objections, however, arises from misunderstanding of Scandalon's view. From Scandalon's contractualism is not the first, but the second order or meta-ethical view. Another common objection that compares the Scandalon theory with Rawls, and then claims that whereas Rawls can derives his two principles of justice without being vague or circular, Scandalon lacks a clear criterion for deciding whether a principle is reasonable, rejectable, or not, as Scandalonian himself points out. Rawls can derive his principles of justice only because a number of moral oppositions are built into the design of the original positions. Those who arise this objection against Scandalonians fail to realize that the similarities of this part Scandalonian contractualism with virtual acts, both approaches being receptive to the ideal that in an algorithm from resolving ethical issues does not exist, but in deciding whether a principle is reasonable, rejectable, a contractualist should employ her practical wisdom, phronesis, or practical judgment. Rawls and Scandalon. This is number 2 right here. Rawls and Scandalon. This is a read. It's probably the read. We're talking about contractualism here. So we got this right here. We got non-consequentialism. We got that. And then we got the desert. We got the negative desert. So it's like this article is like a little bit long. So we're going to get it tonight. So as we should. What's going on, Bruce? What's going on? Yeah. So we in here tonight. So it's a long article, so we're going to get into it. But, basically contractualism, we talked about this last week about contractarianism, and we talked about the social contract. This is like a subversion of it. So basically you have these things that talk about, the social contract and how the acts, and then you talk about one side has utilitarianism, one side has contractarianism, and they use contractualism. I try to balance the two out on the 2 series I did on streams. And these are philosophies that people push nowadays in the world. So when you have these things, you understand that most times people just going to look at it very differently. You know what I'm saying? But that's the thing about it. So when you look at these things like the social contracts and things like that, you just look at it for what it is. I mean, that's just how it gets down in so many purposes. So, yeah. And that's just how you're going to look at it from that angle. So, and I appreciate the fact that me knowing this, there's always a subversion of this philosophy. See, this is my first time tackling this as a whole instead of capitalism. We talked about capitalism extensively. I think we talked about 2 parts of it. So we're going to go, I might do a political world system stream, probably the systems part 3. We're going to do a part 3, and we're going to talk about other things besides this. These are more backed, concrete. So we talked about capitalism, I'll say 1 or twice. And the dollar conspiracy, we're going to talk about that this coming Friday morning. And I'm going to tackle that, and we're going to talk about the dollar a little bit. And they said, what's the big replacement? So contractualism will be another one. This one going to be a part of a first in the series. We'll talk about another part of it as well. I'll find a link to it. Eventually, we're going to cover that as well, because we're going to cover 2 parts of it. But the dollar conspiracy, there'll be a part 2, and we're going to reference the dollar's not falling. I'll come up with a title, so y'all will see what's about to happen. You know what I'm saying? So basically, I'm just going to put it out there, and yeah. So we good for the week. So let's continue. Okay, for a contractualist, justification is built upon the understanding of impartiality. 1 important differences between Rawls and John Harsinyal, John Harsinyal or something like that. John Harsinyal, and on the other hand, the Scandalon on the other hand has to do with their different understandings of the idea of impartiality. Rawls believes that he could arrive to the normative principles if self-interest parties in ignorance of who they are would adopt the same principles in an attempt to maximize their own self-interest. In trying to obtain normative principles, both Rawls and Harensal need to adopt some interpretation of the ethical impartiality. Harensal interprets this conditions as one which all parties beyond the vial beyond the vial of ignorance would have an equal chance of being anyone in society. Rawls, on the other hand, interprets this condition as the one under which self-interest parties are deprived, particularly information, including any objective basis for estimating probabilities. Okay. But yeah, Scandalon points out that the subposition, subposition common to Herrensaul's and Rawls that we could obtain normative principles from self-interest parties under the conditions of ignorance. Trying to maximize their self-interest involves a covert transition from the plausible contractualist idea that we must be able to justify our acts to everyone concerned to the problematic idea that what is justifiable to everyone to concern as well what would have maximized an individual's self-interest beyond the vial of ignorance. Why this supposition problematic? But the short answer is that we cannot justify the situation that who loses out in the society and the losers on the grounds that are the average utility is high. Scandalone rightly points out that the fact that one option promotes higher average utility that another one does not settle the matter as to which its option is morally justified. Okay. A more detailed answer is that we need the kind of impartiality required by contractualism must ensure that a course of action be justified to every individual affected, no matter who he or she is. But Harnsall interprets this condition as the one under which all parties would have an equal chance of being anyone in society. But this interpretation, Scandalon Wright points out, is mistaken, for the losers can reasonably reject any principle that purports to justify their much worse condition by reference to the fact that others are better off and hence average utility is higher. Scandalon thinks that the problem lies in the possibility that much worse conditions suffered by a few can be justified by the fact that many people enjoy a somewhat higher level of well-being. He believes that his contractualism can avoid this problem of aggregation, and that the origin of the problem is the supposition common to Harnsall and Rawls mentioned above. In addition to Rawls, they have a strong justification for suppressing people's moral views in the original position, in contrast in Scandalon's theory, but they are contracting hypothetically. But to reach an agreement, have access to moral reasons. These moral reasons are not just what the contracting parties' moral beliefs are had or happen to be. Rather, theirs are moral reasons are that objectively are. But the vile ignorance is unnecessary in the scandalonist theory. But although the scandalons is clearly correct, I think that some versions of the vile ignorance of the behind which is contracting parties do not know who they are, and though that they have all the other information as well as the capacity to carry out more deliberation may be useful, but the heuristic device in some cases, after all the function of the vile, eliminating rigidness, unfairness, and injustice from the process of choosing a reasonable, non-rejectable principle is similar to that of the Scandalonians' restrictions of reasons to generic reasons alone. Other ways to avoid rigidness, unfairness, injustice include the idea of changing places and its golden rule. Okay, non-consequentialism. We're going to talk about this too. That's number 3 right here. So we're going to get into it. We're going to get into a non-consequentialism. That's the third part. So yeah, basically, we just talked about Rawls and they little objections to contractualism. We talked about the differences in the two, and people just going to come through and just be like, that's it and whatever. So, and that's basically what you have here is that you have these things come about, and then we're just going to be here of the normative stance. So, and that's what you have, and I'm just like pointing out to certain things that, you get into it with everybody. So, yeah, we're going to get into it. We're going to get right into it. So, we're going to get into it. We're going to get into it. What kind of normative the first order theory would cohere to the Scandalonian contractualism? It should be clear from the discussion above, the answer is non-consequentialist, but the theory that both consequences and deontological principles are significance of considerations in moral deliberations, but the kind of non-consequentialism that coheres with contractualism is, however, not just any version of Robert Nozick's entitlement theory. Scandalon points out it is a version of non-consequentialist, yet Scandalonian contractualism would not endure and would not endorse the entitlement theory. Before I explain the way in which Scandalonian contractualism enables us to deal with the difficult issues in punishment, we have to be clear that there are two different types of questions that intersect and intertwine. Okay, questions of the first type of the first order local issues such as why we should have the institution of punishment at all. To answer such questions, we need to use the judgment with the aid of practical wisdom. Phronesis, the phronesis in adopting to the correct broad theory is not sufficient for resolving local issues. This is such in all areas, and particularly ethics, and not only with the respect to the problem of punishment. For instance, even if we happen to adopt the correct broad approach, whether it's a contractualist utilitarianism or virtue ethics, or virtue ethics, we cannot resolve the problem of animal ethics unless we also have the solution to the local issue of moral status, e.g., whether a speciesism of its denial is correct. Questions of the second type that do we have our broad approach? Having the correct broad approach may be necessary, if not sufficient for resolving moral problem. Not only do I accept contractualism, I also hold non-consequential, which implies that both consequence as well as deontological notions such as justice, fairness, and desert are important for a theory of punishment. I shall argue that one important component in the theory of punishment has to do with that the need to prevent crime and maintain safety in the community. On this basis, it's justifiable to punish criminals. Tongue twister. Punish criminals. Yeah, criminals. If we would better protect the public via deterrence and provide that society is largely just, even with the provisions of the society be largely just. My view is prone to following objections first. The first if it aim of the punishment is to ensure public safety by means of securing deterrent affecting through the punishment. Why is the court never justified to the scapegoat as an innocent person? If such scapegoating, we would maximize the deterrent effect in particular collective well-being in general second, and even given the need to promote public safety. But we would not be using criminals, as Jeffrey Murphy argues, merely as means to our end. Not only when he accuse a innocent, but even when he or she is guilty, is punishing a criminal for the sake of general deterrence. Might we be using the criminal merely as a means? But the third, if the deterrence is the main aim of the punishment for serious crimes, might the court be allowed to mete out the excessive harsh sentences in the name of the collective of utility or public safety, or especially when the crimes are socially abhorred? Fourth, might the court ignore the legal excuses such as mistakes, provocation, and involuntary intoxication, duress, and insanity, as well as the grounds for mitigation of the sentence on the grounds of maximizing the deterrent effect? But to reply to these questions, I shall show how Scandalonian contractualism allows us to develop a theory of punishment that accords in importance to the deterrence without the excesses of utilitarianism. It does such because, according to the contractualist thesis, our sentencing policy must be justifiable to everyone affected by it. It can be and hence explain why, if the policy is to deter crime, we should place an upper limit on sentences being mete out for a particular type of crime. A particular type of crime, why we should not punish the innocent in order to deter, and why the court should not abandon the legal excuses in order to maximize the deterrent effect. I shall also supply non-consequential arguments based on the principles of fairness and negative desert to further to support the conclusion that a mixed deterrence theory needs not entail the troubling ideas outlined above. Okay. With a certain exceptions, such as theories of Andrew Vaughn's Hirsch, TMA Scandalon, and HLA Hart theories of punishment fall into three categories. Number one, utilitarian or consequentialist theories. You already know what they are. Utilitarianism is the greatest number. It's the greatest happiness of the greatest number. That's what it means. Consequentialist is based off consequences in theory and the consequential philosophies, consequences of philosophies, basically. That's what consequences consequentialist is. Talks about consequences. Okay. Number two, retributivism or desert theory. And number three, expressivism or communicate theory. That's three. So we're going to read this again. It says utilitarian or consequentialist. That's number one. Number two, retributivism. And then it said number three, expressive or communicative theory. And it says in its emphasis on expressivism. So we're going to get into that. We're going to read that. Expressivism emphasizes the denunciation of the offender by the court or the public. Communicative theory builds on the basis, and the addition places importance on the public apology expresses by the offender, as well as the courts communicating with the victim and the police and the public. And central to communicate theory is an idea offenders should be treated as irrational agents and as members of community that has a genuine commitment to certain values. But the whole process of a criminal trial, including the giving of evidence by witness in court, cross-examination, applications of criminal law to the case for the verdict, and the punishment constitutes ways of addressing offenders as rational agents. I am sympathetic to Jonathan Glover's view of the expressivism has a tendency to collapse into either a consequentialist or retributivist theory, depending on its rationale for the court of the public to denounce the criminal. If the need to denounce the criminal has to do with the consequences, such as theories can be classified as consequentialist theory. If on the other hand, the reason for the condemnation has to do with the criminal's desert, but the theory would be retributivist in nature, even though a retributivist theory does not necessarily have to place emphasis on communication. I do not believe that the either deterrence theory or retributivism alone can adequately account for the three central questions of criminal punishment. Why punishment? Why punish? How much? Whom to punish? Non-consequentialism is much more plausible theory when compared with these two positions. It will be helpful first to consider two opposite views about the relevance of consequences for moral consideration. On the other hand, though one might hold the implausible view of the consequences are morally irrelevant, most people would agree to that consideration of consequences play a role in a practical reasoning. Should I purchase a cell phone that is a durable, user-friendly, or equipped with gold camera? With a good camera? It is difficult to think that the considerations of this kind are irrelevant to practical reasoning in general or moral deliberation in particular. To give another example, if we can save one stranger's life to alternatively the lives of 5 other strangers, then the ceteris paribus we should save the lives of the latter. We should do so because well-being and hence consequence matters, even though it is not only the thing that matters. On the other hand, one might hold on the other extreme view that the only consequences matters, but this is a strong claim because it either denies that the relevance of fairness, justice, and desert, or else instance that these considerations must be reducible to consequences. Yet rejecting consequentialism does not mean that the consequences would not be irrelevant in practical reasoning. For in one acts of consideration of consequence, one is not thereby a consequentialist, not unless one also subscribes to the view of consequences are the only relevant considerations for all ethical issues. You hear that? That's what it says. Okay. Why is it often proposed that the retributivism and deterrence theory are incomparable? I'll read that again. Why is it often presupposed that the retributivism and deterrence theory are incomparable? He's asking a question. My conjecture that is that this is the case because of retributivism and deterrence theory are grounded on deontology, and utilitarianism, respectively, which are indeed incomparable. But this is a false dichotomy. Non-consequentialism holds that both consequences and deontological considerations are relevant in moral deliberation. In developing a credible theory of punishment, non-consequentialists can accord proper weight to the need for deterrence while also taking account of deontological concerns such as fairness and desert. The contrary view that the consideration of deterrence and desert are incomparable or mutually exclusive is mistaken. So yeah, deontology is talks about duty, the philosophy of duty. So we're going to get into that duty. So it's in the umbrella of utilitarianism. We're going to get into that. It's like a doctrine. Basically, when you hear utilitarianism in this instance, it just means the moral worth in action is solely determined by its contribution to overall utility and maximizing happiness or pleasure as summoned among all people. But it also means the greatest number. That's what it means. That's utilitarianism. It's hedonistic, by the way. And also, when you hear it in certain things, when you talk about contractualism, then you talk about deontology, and it mentions right here, but it did come out of Epicureanism. That's a future stream. With the two are very similar. We're going to talk about in philosophy. So it's a lot to bear in. And determinism and all that stuff. Yeah, the utilitarianism has been around since the Victorian period, but it was spawned out of the Epicureanism period. It's a whole concept. It's a liberal concept, by the way. It actually birthed liberalism and libertarianism, by the way, and Marxists, they use a lot of utilitarian ideals. Let's just put it that way. So yeah. Oh, here's deontology. I was looking right at it, and we're gonna read this up. I'm gonna research it for y'all. So deontology, ethics, focus on right or wrongness. That's deontology, what we just read, and actions themselves opposed to rightness or wrongness, consequences of those actions of consequentialism or the character and habits of the actor, virtue ethics. And so, and that's called about Immanuel Kant. He's another one. Moral absolutism. Immanuel Kant. And then you talk about the utilitarians like John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham. These are guys that birthed that liberal philosophy. John Locke and all this stuff. We're going to get into that. It's a little history, a little ideology. It's just a piece that I come through. And a lot of these dudes in certain spaces co-sign these ideologies and they just don't know what they expounded on. So I'm gonna put this in the chat in case you know what I was reading. I was reading that and just put that in there. So, that's just in the chat for y'all. And also that's deontology, right? and we're going to go back to utilitarianism, right? Y'all can read this for yourself. Utilitarianism is very, very, very uh extreme topic. It needs to be touched because a lot of people don't understand that when they start using certain words, and I trolled a certain individual, he tried to use it as a black pill reference. There's no such thing as a black pill utilitarian. It doesn't exist. Utilitarianism is probably the basic foundation of human life. Like when the shit ends, and then you also need an alternative like contractualism. We deal with that every day. So these are two ideologies I love to tackle. But but we're going to get into it. But they use it in political world systems as well. So you have these things going on, and people say it in so many words. I was the first one to talk about it last year and made content out of it. So when you start looking at my old stuff, you start seeing what's going on. So yeah, it is what it is, and you just have it. Yeah, and that's what we gotta see. Okay, okay, we're gonna read this next part right here. So as we're going down further into it, as shall I agree. The mix of non-consequentialist theory and punishment consists of the following components. First, general deterrence is the important consideration in regard to punishment. Second, a criminal should be blamed or condemned by the court according to his positive desert. Third, the ideas of fairness and negative desert can explain why an innocent person and a defendant with a legal excuse should not be punished at all. Why a convicted offender with grounds for mitigation should be punished less, should be punished less. For given the contractualist idea that our sentencing policies have to be justifiable to everyone affected by it, there must be an maximal limit of sentence for any given offense. This is one piece that you see a lot, and that's one of the parts that you see. So yeah, this is one of the tools that you have. So treating someone, okay, we get into the part treating someone as means versus treating someone as mere means. This is an interesting topic. This is under contractualism again. So we got to see who's who, what, and it just goes down to show you that we in here. So I don't get this on the way. So and that's just what it is. Yeah, back at it again. Let's see. Right here. Though general deterrence does not constitute the whole story, it's explained why communities should have criminal punishment. It is integral part of the story. Surely, criminal status are intact with a view to secure social goals. One such a goal to discourage certain acts that are regarded as social disadvantageous, socially disadvantageous, pollution and tax evasion, as well as robbery and murder, are the kinds of acts that the community has reasons to discourage or prevent. To think that such laws were were passed solely with the view to punish those who deserve to be punished seems plausible. This is especially so regarding crimes that are mala prohibita, such as parking offenses. General deterrence is not only socially advantageous goal, but reform, habitation, and treatment are also important goals for lesser crimes. For younger offenders, general deterrence is, however, an especially important goal for serious crimes. One reasons that the motivates the people to reject general deterrence are basis justifies criminal punishment is the thought that the punishment criminals for the sake of general deterrence. We should be using their merely means. According to Jeffrey Murphy, if we punish criminals for the sake of deterrence, we are using them merely as the means, not only when they are innocent, but even if they are guilty. Murphy's objections, if sound, would be applied not only to utilitarianism, but also to any theory such as non-consequentialism that takes consequences to be morally important. Murphy has not spelled out his own reasonings as to why punishing criminals on the grounds of general deterrence would be using them merely as means. But one can make a conjecture. His reasons is probably the following. Yeah, we're gonna get into the following real quick. So that's just basically what it is. So what I mean, yeah, with the following. If we punish criminals not for their own sake, but only for the sake of general deterrence, then we should be using them for the sake of others, and hence using them merely as means to promoting the well-being of other individuals or society as a whole. Therefore, we should be using them impermissibly and violate their rights as persons. And here's the next part. I want to say, I shall argue that this view, though plausible, is mistaken. Murphy is inspired by Kant. Kant holds that we use another person's merely as means. We should use her as a thing in a way in a way that it fails to treat her as a person or in accordance with her dignity. For Kant, to treat someone merely as means is morality impermissible. Consider the transplant case in a small town. 5 patients are exact dying of the failure of a different organ. One has heart failure, another pancreas failure, the third one liver failure, and so on. They will die. They will all die in 2 days. Their only chance for survival is through organ transplant among themselves, through a voluntary arrangement in which they will draw lots. In fact, the family members will draw lots for each of them. The unlucky patient will have to sacrifice himself for the sake of the 4 lucky patients whose lives will be saved. That sounds like utilitarianism right there. They would do some shit like that, but nobody's built like that. To avoid unnecessary complications, to let us assume that the chances of the 4 lucky patients being saved via transplantation are 100%, that the lottery is a fair one. Thus, if the patients agree to enter this arrangement, they will fall into temporary coma. After receiving as an injection of the anesthetic, so that anesthetic, so that there will be no difficulty in enforcing the agreement. Further, suppose that this is an arrangement is optional. Only those who are agreed to enter the lottery will have the prospect of being saved, of being sacrificed. Thus, who do not enter into this arrangement will not be sacrificed, but will also not be saved. See, there you go. A lot of people can't handle that. See, when they talk about utilitarianism, they just want to act up and say, this don't matter, this don't matter. And it does matter, because 9 out of 10, you don't have people talking about it in long terms. And that's just how it is. So when you get people like that, they just want to talk about certain things. There they are. And that's your answer. So basically you just have that. And we see that reference right here. So we're not tripping right now. We telling it like it is, bro. We just get it in motion, and that's how it is. And yeah, man. Yeah, we're just getting in here emotions of the fact. You know, what's going on here? What's going on here? Okay. Yeah, we gotta get that under control. Get that under control. Let's see, get this under control. Gotta get that under control. We ain't tripping over here. Yeah, we gotta get that under control. We gotta get that under control. Yeah, it's a little wiring, but we'll be all right. Yeah, we gotta get that under control. Gotta get that under control. I'll deal with her later. Okay. Get that out of here. Get that out of here. All right. An arrangement is considerable. Okay, we read all that. Yeah, arrangement. Yeah, we read that. So we get into the nitty gritty. But would each patient, and perhaps the surgeons as well, as being using each other, even himself or herself, merely as means? In Kant's language, Kant distinguished the two types of using people as means, namely the permissible and the impermissible use of others. He calls them using someone as means, using someone merely as means, respectively. In any cooperation joint venture, we are in a sense use of our partners, but this is generally morally permissible unless the agreement is illegal or tainted with fraud or unfairness, such as the case of being distinguished from case when someone is used in a morally Im- yeah impermissible way. My fault. Morally impermissible way. Okay. So if any arrangement is hypothetically consentable, and if people enter into without deception, and if in addition they actually accept it, and if the arrangement is carried out fairly, then they're entering into the agreement, and subsequently consequence is morally permissible. Thus, in the transplant case, it is a morally permissible for the patients to enter into the lottery, provided that each of the knows of possible consequences. It is possible to view the consentable arrangement at one that patients who is wished to live longer would have reasons to agree on. In the transplant case, everyone has access to probabilities of survival should they have entered into the lottery, compared with the probabilities of survival, such they stay away from it. But the higher probability of probability of survival created by the lottery cannot on its own generate an obligation to enter into it. There must be also account consent in this case. We are need to investigate why this is the case. Certainly, there are different scenarios that call the different types of consent, consent, types of consent, and people might disagree over the considerations of relevant for different decisions. First, there are cases where the hypothetical consent is necessary and sufficient for the arrangement. For instance, in an epidemic of deadly disease, quarantine is justified because number one, the case is other regarding. Number two, quarantine is necessary to prevent dire consequences. And number three, the burden imposes on patients is likely to be bearable. Yep, that is so true. That's the three things they talk about. Okay, second, there's the other extreme where the arrangement is hypothetically non-considerable. I mean non-consentable. Yeah, non-consentable and hence unjustifiable. Consequently, actually, consent is usually to justify the arrangement. Dueling with the actual consent is justified because of the personal generic reasons for justifying this sort of activity is weak compared with the personal generic reason against it, and viz in the community has a strong reason for not settling disputes by the way of dueling murder contracts are also unjustifiable and avoided because of the community has a strong reason for prohibiting murder. Third, in between these two extremes in the lie in the case in which is acknowledged from the standpoint of a hypothetical consent. That actual consent is also necessarily to justify the arrangements, in particular, the purchase of self-regarding kinds of insurance, such as life insurance. Most commercial transactions would be typical, required actual consent. I believe that the transplant case belongs to the third types of cases. Why does hypothetical consent has a normative force at all? Consider this is the case. Suppose Mary and her partner join, are meeting for dinner in a restaurant before an opera. Mary is running late. Knowing Mary's preference as well as John orders her favorite dish for her, so they will not be late. Not be late for the opera, but the dish arrives as soon Mary arrives at the restaurant. Mary is pleased. The question is whether Mary could have objected to John's ordering her favorite dish, even though she acknowledges that she would have ordered. This is what she would have ordered. But the idea of hypothetical consent would imply that the answer is no. This does not mean, however, that in all scenarios for the hypothetical consent of no actual consent is relevant. In fact, as I said earlier, parties in the hypothetical scenario could agree that the actual consent may be relevant or important in certain cases. Yeah. How to treat another. So we on that part. So we into it. So we get into it. As you can tell, so we into it. We into it. Yeah. But the presence of hypothetical consent ensures that people will enter in a consentable agreement if an arrangement is consentable. It will be it will have to fulfill an objective threshold requirement of reasonableness. Reasonableness, while the threshold will depend on the nature of the practice concerned. If, on the other hand, a practice or arrangement is so unwise or unreasonable as to render it impermissible, no actual consent can render the practical permissible. Conversely, when there is only one but only a justifiable arrangement, the arrangement is not only permissible, but also mandatory, in which case no actual consent would be necessary. In a broader range of cases, an actual consent is required, but this is because actual consent can be relevant in a number of ways. First, it can be relevant and necessary when the hypothetical consent determines the arrangement that we ought to enter into. Thus, in transplant case, the parties could have consented in a numbers of ways to whom to sacrifice. If there were behind the veil of ignorance, And Ceteris Paribus, number one, the oldest person since he has already lived so long, which might make sense from the point of view of distributive justice. Number two, the person with the least number of dependents, as the decision will minimize pain and sufferings. Number three, the person who is least socially useful from the perspective of social utility. Here we go. Number four, but the person who also less likely to lead a happy life, and if there is a lottery. Number five, if the person who loses out in the drawing of lots, if these options resulting in under determination, even a reason or logic cannot remove this kind of indeterminate interdeterminacy or something like that. Interdeterminacy in other cases through. Okay, in other cases though, that there may be the interdeterminacy in this strong sense, fiercely disagreement, but may exist among reasonable people over what should be agreed to. Yeah. Yeah, they serious about this, man. They serious about this. It's called treating someone as means versus treating someone as mere means. That's what we're still on. We're still on number 4. So, yeah, this part right here, yeah. This ideology is basically, is based off the means of people and things like that. And then you get into it. It's just what it is, man. Like, that's how you look at it. You don't really look at it so many words. So, yeah, man, that's what you got to boil down to. And so many. Still reading this. Still, in some self-regarding cases, should have the anatomy to choose whether to join in an arrangement, such as whether to buy a home insurance because of the variation of preferences among different people. A driver of a motor vehicle must buy the third-party insurance. However, because this decision is other regarding a completely different function of actual consent is that is rightly taker's account of the actual interests of the parties of concerted and self-interest and morality are often intertwined and mistaken for each other. If there were no actual consent, there would be no guarantee that self-interest and groups' interests are not to pursue consciously or subconsciously in the name of justice or morality. When parties argue for the best or most fair arrangement behind the veil of ignorance, here we go again, the veil of ignorance, they are not actually behind the veil of ignorance. Finally, the parties must be assured of that. Whoever turns out to be the lucky or unlucky one that contracted the obligation will be performed. Here he goes. They say contract, social contract. Here we go. Otherwise, potential participants might feel that might feel that the agreement is nothing more than an enforceable deal. Enforceable deal. For all those reasons, actually, consent and the render on the consentable arrangement and moral binding. Yeah, moral binding. Here we go. And now is why why should a contractualist agree that the actual consent is sometimes necessary or sufficient to render a hypothetical consentable agreement and morally permissible or even mandatory? According to Scandalonian contractualism, we must justify our act to every effective person. Hypothetical consentable arrangement it is, by definition, one that meets the threshold of reasonableness, and one of the participants can be reasonable, join in, or opt out. But this being the case, actual consent could be necessary as well as sufficient to render a hypothetically consentable agreement and morally binding in certain cases. If an arrangement is socially advantageous, potentially participants can render it is justified by offering their actual consent. So we just read treating someone as a means versus treating someone as mere means. So punishment for the sake of general deterrence. So, like I said, what we got on the clock here? What we got it on? What's going on, the general? What's going on? Salute, 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 man. Salute, salute, salute. It's an hour in. So we in here. We in here. We in here. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just on a different microphone, just broadcasting the thing. So, I mean, just we out here, man. We out here. Everybody's tripping about that boy. Everybody's tripping about that boy, but I ain't worried about it. He get what he get. You know what I'm saying? Yep. It is what it is. But okay. We're gonna get to the part, but let me step away. I'll be right back. Yeah, back at it. Woo, I'm back. Get that out of the way. Okay. Punishment for the sake of the deterrence. Okay. Consider punishment for the sake of general deterrence, PGD. If PGD advances an important social goal, and if society is roughly just, then it's hypothetically considerable and a permissible. In such a case, no one would be usually merely as means. However, whether PGD is consentable would depend on whether society is at least largely or nearly just. This provisible, this provisio is important, for otherwise arrangement might not even be consentable. But this is just because this is widely held among sociologists and criminologists that poverty and or other extremes in inequality causes crime. If society is not at least largely just, then one on Scandalonian terms, the practice of punishing people who through no fault of their own have a higher chance of committing crime for the sake of deterring others would be disallowed by conjunction. Number one, the contractualist thesis is that the practice must be justifiable to everyone affected by it. And number two, the fact that such practice cannot justify those who are badly off in society who suffer as a result of poverty and or social economic inequality. There you have it. There you have it. There you have it. There you have it. There it is. It said it right here. And this is that the true poor suffers from the robbery, theft, and acts of violence by criminals who live in ghettos. But it does not follow that they must therefore consent to PGD. Four, and in addition to the consideration of self-interest, they should also take account of whether an arrangement is fair or not. To see why this is the case, consider a variation of transplant cases. The dice is loaded. Constantly patient with lung failure says has a higher chance of being sacrificed, say 40% than the others, but lower the chances of dying. Then the entailed is not joining the arrangement at all, which is 100%. Assuming that is the patient, that the patient is known as these facts, should he consented to the lottery? I think he has a reason for not consenting, namely because the lottery is unfair. The situation is quite different if the dice has not been tampered with. Analogically, if society is nearly just or equal, then everyone has a reason to support PGD. If there is to be criminal justice, there must be social justice as well. On the other hand, if society is largely just, then PGD is probably the moral just permissible and even mandatory in society when a social order without the PGD is hypothetical, consentable, and then whereas PGD is permissible or mandatory or whether would depend on whether PGD or its absence would be actually be consentable, and particularly society as a social order with PGD might not be hypothetical and consentable in certain societies. For example, if the crime rate is extremely low, or if PGD has no effect and against crime, or if PGD is a counterproductive, it is not very plausible to say that PGD must be required in all societies. All societies, regardless of their concrete conditions, even though general deterrence is relevant to the theory of punishment in our society. Okay. We're almost done to number 6, number 7, number 8. So it's a long read. Thank y'all for y'all's patience, but he said our society. Yeah, their society. Okay, we're gonna read this next part. Okay, the idea of general deterrence should form a integral the part of the theory of the punishment for another reason, as well. The pure revisionist, retributivist, retributivist theory, e.g., Kant's view, which claimed that retribution or desert are the only grounds on which the court should meet out punishment. Says the offenders deserve to be punished and that they must be punished. However, if the desert or retribution were the only ground for punishment, then punishment must be carried out, even if it actually provoked the undesirable effect of increasing crimes, such as consequence would render this view objectionable. And in addition to diplomatic immunity in criminal cases is grounded on practical considerations. Unless we are willing to bite the bullet, they use this term. I heard people use this term a lot, bite the bullet, and deny that the diplomatic immunity is ever grounded for not prosecuting a diplomat. Unless we want to say that we should punish criminals, even if doing so would cause a counter deterrent effect. We should accept that the view that the goal of deterrence should be an integral part of the theory of punishment, that the most forcible ground for holding this view is that, as Rawls pointed out, the litigations are passed with a view of its securing social goals, one of the which is the prevention of crime. Analogous to Rawls in a view is the case of the professional who announces a penalty for the late submission of the term papers because she wants to deter the latents rather than to mete out the penalty because of the students who submitted late papers deserve to be punished. Yeah, so that's talking about punishment for the sake of deterrence. So now we're talking about the thought experiment. Yeah, this should be good. The thought experiment. This is number 6. So thought experiment, we at it. So it is what it is. So we back at it again. So, and we're still on contractualism. And then this is a long read. So, we got about 3 to go. And then I'm going to drop this little information on y'all. We're going to talk about, this is part 1. I'm not going to get in the rest tonight. So that's basically what I'm saying. If you know that this is the type of stuff that we talked about, this is the stuff that you long term, it's going to be what it is. So yeah, I ain't got no switches on this mic, so y'all better chill. So I got 2 cream colors. Yeah, see what's going on here. All right. We ain't tripping off too long, so we're gonna get into it. So the thought experiment, retribution and its cumulative variance of maintaining that the criminal deserve punishment and that the punishment should be carried out by the order of the court. Retributionism became popular in the 1970s at a time when the public opinion was critical of the need of criteriation of the reform to mete out varying sentences of different offenders for the same offense. Andrew Von Harris doing justice, arguing that the court should be mete out the sentence according to the desert of the defenders, was welcome response to sentencing policies of an early era. As a theory of punishment, retributionism is attractive for its power to explain why the court should not frame an innocent person, why vicariously punishment, e.g., the practice of vicariously punishing the parents, teachers, and friends of an offender for the most serious crimes in ancient China, is morally impermissible, and why sentencing should be appropriated to the offenses to the offensive committed. On the other hand, it has been argued that retributionism, at least an important version of positive retribution, has not been successfully established. I shall discuss Scandalon's criticism of retributionism in a section 8 below. Yeah, we're getting into it. So we're getting into it to discuss retributionism, and further let us consider the following: the utopian village. Here we go, the utopian village. We're going to get to this part. To discuss retributionism further, let us discuss the following utopian village, Suppose that a village is isolated from the rest of the world, that there has been no serious crime for the past 50 years. Someone has recently committed a serious crime, say an indecent assault. Indecent assault. He is now truly deeply remorseful, but the victim has forgiven him. But the court convicts him of the offense and condemns him for what for condemns him for what he did. Okay, for what he did. And however, the court decides that under the circumstances that accused to be spared from any hand of treatment. Is the court's ruling defensible? I believe that the answer it is yes. To understand why it's considered a slightly different case, suppose that for the past 12 months, a certain offense, said car theft, has been rampant, has caused social problems. Should the court increase in sentence in order to deter such an offense? Clearly, the court should do so. So provided that the sentence is not excessive. But the Proviso suggests that there should be a cap on the offense. And an issue which is I would recommend below. If this is the ruling defensible, that there is reversible is also defensible, should be needed to deter the crimes no longer obtained. To example of the village is such as the case in which there is no need to deter crimes. Okay, we're going to get in this part right here. The problem with pure retributivism is the following. If the two people have committed the same offense in two different communities, but then provide that the various factors, viz. And their intentions, the harm causes, and in the circumstances which in the offense was committed, are quantitatively identical, that the retributive and enhance of the sentence should be the same. The circumstances to be considered here included, for instance, in the harm causes to be a victim, intention of the criminal, and whether there were aggravating factors, e.g., a breach of trust on the part of the criminal, or whether there were mitigating factors, e.g., provocation by the victim. But the circumstances do not. However, they include a social need for deterrence. Thus, on this view, indecent assault, say, of the moderate kind, would call for a second of the same severity, whether that the offense was committed in a metropolis or in the utopian village described here. A pure revisionist retributivist would argue that this is an isolated utopian village that the court had actually wrongly, and that is should have meted out a sentence of imprisonment to the offender. But even though he is truly remorseful and the victim has forgiven him. In this example, the offenders having deeply, sincerely repented indicates that his chances of regicide is minimal. And second, that the fact that the victim has forgiven him to implies that she will not feel badly or treated unjustly if he is not punished. Most importantly, until the case, no crime has been committed in this contentious and self-discipline, so there is no need for deterrence. And further, if the offender were to be punished, it will be unclear what is the proportionate sentence should be. Since there is no precedent in the village, let us assume that the oddest person alive there cannot recall anything about sentencing in the village. But the small scale of the village, where everyone knows everyone else, but the uncontaminated innocence, the traditional simple way of life, as well as the education, family, friends, and perhaps counseling, have all contributed to the virtual absence of crime. Purely retributionist is not plausible because it is not a sensitive to context in determining the right sentence. A judge should take into account to an intention or means real of the offender, or the type of the offense of the committed, that the harm causes to the victim, and the circumstances under which the offense took place, would which would include whether there are mitigating or aggravating factors. In addition to believe that a exceptional circumstances, the judge should take account of one of the further type of fact, which I call the contextual fact. In the case of above, the contextual fact is that the visual and isolated from the outside world has extremely peaceful from the past 50 years. Hence, it is extremely unlikely for serious offenses to occur in the foreseeable future. Pure retributivism does not allow for this kind of contextual fact. It is therefore plausible that an appropriate sentence for this crime in this utopian village should be different from the sentence for the same crime in a cosmopolitan city. Cosmopolitan city. My fault. Cosmopolitan city. Yeah, my fault. But the question is what accounts for diversions of sentence and policies that there are two places. The only plausible explanation takes recourse to the need to the deterrence in any hypothetical village. There is no need for general deterrence, whether in a cosmopolitan society, there is such a need. Okay. So we get to this part, and I hope the example of the car theft above illustrates why the length of the sentence should vary in a tandem with the need to deter an offense subject as maximum, as shall discuss. In the limiting case of the utopian village, the appropriate sentence could be one discouraged. There, a theory of criminal punishment should take account of this sort of contextual fact. One of the strengths of the contractualism is that this sensitive to this need. Okay, there's number 7, limits of general deterrence. So we're going to hear right quick. So we talked about limited deterrence, right? So we're going to read this off. It's a long read. So we got some hours in. So it's like an hour, 32 minutes and 29 seconds. So we're gonna beat this thing. So it's only 9 things. So we're gonna talk about it. So contractualism in its purest form. So you gotta look at it for what it is. And I'm just saying, like, we here now. So we here now. So we're gonna get into it. And that's how we're gonna get into it. And that's how I look at it. In so many words. And that's how we're gonna look at it. But so yeah, we're gonna talk about the deterrence part, and then we get into it. So yeah, because this is getting good right here. So we know what's going on. We'll get into it right quick. All right, we're gonna get into it. Yeah. Set this up real quick. Okay, the limits of general deterrence. Probably many reject the deterrence, therefore, because they went to reject utilitarianism. Utilitarianism certainly act utilitarian. You're talking about this version of utilitarianism. Here's the key word: act utilitarianism. Here we go. Entails unplatable conclusion for the framing of an innocent person as scapegoated is permissible, or even mandatory, if doing so will maximize the deterrence effective in particular, or promoting good consequence in general. However, I wish to point out that the endorsing general deterrence as an important goal in criminal punishment does not make it us utilitarian anymore than a driver who chooses a vehicle for its reliability, handling, and mileage is thereby a consequentialist. So that makes the person consequentialist. See, I just read that part again. I'm gonna read that part again. Hold on, we're gonna read that part again. So they use the word maximize. That's talking about the happiness and the greatest number. That's what utilitarianism talks about. Happiness of the greatest number, the pleasure, right? Here we go. And then he said, however, I wish to point out the endorsing general deterrence as an important goal in a criminal punishment does not take, he said, does not make us a utilitarian anymore. He said utilitarian anymore. Then a driver who chooses a vehicle for its reliability, handling, and mileage is thereby a consequentialist. That's basically what it's saying at that part right there. I like that. If people try to know, I mean, hey, I got this information right here. So, although consequentialists are relevant, important considerations in moral matters, according to non-consequentialism, they are not the only considerations. Considerations that cannot be reduced to consequences, such as fairness, justice, and desert, are also important moral considerations on this view. So, one can be non-consequentialist and assign an importance to general deterrence as well as fairness, justice, and even desert. Even the best consequences can be realized when considerations of fairness, justice, and desert are set aside. It does not follow the criminal punishment. Criminal punishment is thereby justified. Surely, harsh laws that inflict the heavy penalties on offenders may be effective in a deterring or preventing crimes. However, it does not follow that these laws are therefore justified, since it could be very unfair for the court to mete out undeservedly heavy sentences such as those mandated by the three strikes law, which is true, and in various American states, and especially in California. Yeah, they got that. Still got that. That's why everything is fucked up. You got problems around the world. It's like that in southern states, but we ain't gonna get into that. Let me get out of there. Consider this pocket example: a city state that relies heavily on tourism. Miami's one of them, and it's on the brink of economic disaster because a small group of pickpockets who take not only the money but also the travel documents in the wallets has caused the number of tourists to plummet. Consequently, the economy suffers heavily. That's like that around in foreign countries, American cities, and that's why it went down. Yeah, Atlanta was like that too. Quiet as kept. Atlanta was like that too. Quiet as kept. The city was like that. So you got these problems around the world, like yeah, and it's also in the states too, especially in the cities of Atlanta and especially Miami. So it's a mess. Yeah, tourism is a mess. That's why tourism is always going to plummet. We have shit like that, but that's normal, man. That's human nature. People like that all the time. You can't control how people think, and that's what I always say all the time on this channel. They think for their damn selves. That's why I don't take nobody seriously. What they say, they do the shit all the time. So yeah. So tourist employment. Okay. Consequently, the economy suffers heavily. Public schools have to close. Hospitals are no longer operative, and many patients die as a result. These pickpockets are skillful and hard to catch. Suppose the police have arrested a pickpocket and the jury has convicted him of the offense, but the court is now considering what sort of sentence to mete out. The judge thinks that she should mete out the heaviest sentence in order to generate the maximum deterrent effect. On the other hand, she also thinks such as a heavy sentence exceeds what the offender deserves. How should she decide? Quite obviously, meting out the death penalty. They need to really bring that back. And if the laws allow it, even life imprisonment is unjustifiably harsh. After all, the offender has only committed the offense of pickpocketing, and it is equally obvious that a pure deterrence theory is unable to offer satisfactory account because just as utilitarianism seeks to maximize utility, like we read above, here they throwing a shot at it, maximize utility, like happiness of the greatest number, the pleasure of happiness, the greatest happiness of the greatest number of pleasure. Yep. Here we go. It's a pure deterrence theory that attempts to maximize the deterrent effect, at least in those cases where doing so would bring about the greatest collective well-being. And it's true that a consequentialist might argue that the cost of punishment, i.e., the pain and suffering to the borne by the prison inmates, must be taken into consideration. However, there is no guarantee that the mathematics will always work out in the favor of the pickpocket, no matter what the social circumstance turn out to be. So, according to contractualism, the court cannot justifiably meet excessively harsh in punishment to an offender in the name of deterrence, because of the court cannot justifiably this punishment to the human to inflict the which punishment on the offender which would be used in him merely as a means, and like we read above, and for fortition in a judicial, and that frames similar to conclusions the notions of negative desert. So we got the desert part. That's number 8. So yeah, we were right at number 8. So we'll see how much we got in time. We got in time here. Okay, so it's an hour. Yeah, got the hour in here. So we got the desert. And they said deterrence and consideration of desert fairness, justice to constitute another imprint of the dimension of any theory in criminal punishment. What do I mean by desert? To say that someone deserves X is to say that there will be deontological reasons for giving X to her. In a respect of her acts of characteristics, according to positive retributivism, a criminal should be punished by virtue of the fact that he was committed a crime that he deserved to be punished to his crime. Yet, whether a positive retributivism is defensible is controversial. What are the grounds for saying that someone deserves to be punished? Why should someone to be punished if this has no positive consequence? The debate is not yet satisfied in favor of positive retributivism. In particular, Scandalon has argued that which is a reasonable to condemn criminals for their offense on the grounds of the desert. It is not reasonable to argue that they should be punished according to their desert. This is the case. This is the case because Scandalon points out that the appropriate reason to desert, both for the wrongdoings and for the beneficial acts, is attitudinal. We can rightfully change or attitude to people who performed deplorable acts because of their desert, but we cannot punish them on the grounds of the desert alone. I believe that the positive retributivism is not yet established. Nevertheless, I told some intuitive versions of positive retributivism. It's called the blame retributivism, which is more commonly known as expressivism. According to blame retributivism, as a criminal deserves to be condemned for his wrongful offense. In his classic paper, Joel Finberg has convincingly argued that the condemnation is essential aim in punishment, yet has Finberg convincingly shown that the hard treatment can be grounded on his expressivist idea that in the convention of our society, condemnation is carried out through such harsh treatment. I believe that an account is still needed to explain why we have such conversation. The most plausible approximately true account. This is that it had treatment deters. Okay, treatment deters, right? Okay. So Scandalonian says that we can condemn wrongdoers on the grounds of desert, but to the ground, but to goes beyond the condemnation and to the mete out that a hard treatment and requires that there will be a deterrent of the defect. According to Scandalonian, he further points out that the hard treatment could not be justified as an expression of the blame or condemnation on the grounds that the mere convention of expressing condemnation could not hear the necessary moral weight. This is true, I believe, because there are various ways to denounce a crime and its perpetrators without hard treatment, such as an announcement of someone's conviction on public media. To justify hard treatment, general deterrence seem to be necessary. Therefore, while it makes perfect sense to condemn a cold blooded murderer, it is not clear why society must also execute him in order to condemn him. It is doubtful to the one numerous hard treatments such as capital punishment, long sentence could be justified merely as an expression of the blame or condemnation. Thus, Finberg's example that we often think people not only verbally but also by offering a gift cannot be plausible and extended to the case of meting out hard treatments such as long sentences, performance for the past year. In Yeah, long sentence. My fault. Long sentences. Similarly, while department chair can take his secretary with a relatively small percentage of for her diligent performance for the past year, his giving her a house or even a new car would seem be grossly excessive, aimlessly to explain why our penal system uses long sentences as hard treatment. The justification grounded on general deterrence seems necessary. So, yeah. So you have these things around. So, yeah, such a way. But yeah, it's 9:58 right now Eastern time. But you know how it is. How it is. We're gonna get into it. Part of the disagreement between Scandaloni and Findenberg has to do with the question of whether hard treatment can be grounded in condemnation alone. Scandalon holds that the condemnation must be limited to verbal communication in charge of attitude on the grounds that the appropriate response to desert is attitudinal, whereas a Findenberg believes that the condemnation can be extended to the hard treatment. My view lies in between both positions, since we give people gifts to express our gratitude to them. Why can the court not mete out minor hard treatments, such as community service, at least partly as the expression of condemnation? Scandalon's objection that condemnation cannot bear the moral weight of justifying hard treatment is without force. In the case of minor uh, hard treatment, because the community service is not to the burdensome. So, I mean, a burden has to be unjustified on the grounds of condemnation alone. Moreover, if in some cases a minor hard treatment can be justified on the grounds of condemnation, it would be seen as strange that when we consider serious crimes, hard treatment would have no relevance whatsoever with respect to condemnation. Thus, it seems reasonable to think that it's just a minor hard treatment can be justified at least some extent as condemnatory and hard treatment can also be justified to some small extended on grounds of condemnation, but not beyond this extent. Therefore, severe punishments for serious crimes are justified mostly by considerations of general deterrence. So, negative desert. We get into the negative desert, and this is the last part. We get into the negative desert. So this is number 9. Let's see how many hours I did this. This is gonna be 2 hours. This is, you know, so we're gonna get into it. I'm gonna drop this later. Yeah, that's just a thing that, we're gonna read this. I'm gonna pin it first. I'm not done yet. Yeah, I just opened it up. So let me read number 9 before I let y'all up. So if anybody wants to counter this, I'm gonna put this in the chat later. I'm gonna read this part because I know people are busy acting a fool right now. So we already know where they at. They panicking right now. So we're gonna get into it. Yeah, we're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into it. All right. Okay, another form of retributionism that is both weaker and more plausible to the positive retributionists and negative retributionism. According to negative retributionists, if one has committed any crime, one does not deserve to be punished and hence should not be punished. This view is clearly correct. Can one accept negative retributionism without accepting positive retributionism? I believe that the answer is in the affirmative for two reasons. First, on any plausible understanding of desert justice and punishment, one cannot deny negative retributionism. Even a utilitarian thinks that we should frame an innocent person in order to avert disaster from happening, has to think that is, the innocent person does not deserve being punished. If she believes in the desert at all, because an innocent person has not committed any offense. Second, and more importantly, negative retributionism, which is much weaker, claim the positive retributionism does not presuppose positive retributionism. One might ask why. If positive retributionism is unintelligibly or implausible, negative, I'll say negative. Yes, yeah, plausibly negative. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna say negative for the fact, for the pure fact. So for the negative, positive for okay, negative, accepting positive, cannot deny negative retributionism on that innocent person's disasters happening, does not believe punish. Okay, negative. Oh dang, I done skipped over. Fuck. Did it wrong. Okay, negative retributionism, which is much weaker to claim the positive and all that. Retribution, why positive? Okay, negative retributionism should be accepted. My answer is the positive retribution is not unintelligible, must be simply doubtful or controversial. More important, if we are to accept positive retribution and it has to apply in the case, we must accept the following. Number one, in this particular case, the defendant has committed a crime. Number two, because of the crime committed, he deserves to be condemned. Number three, because of the crime committed, he deserves to be punished. Okay, that's the three things that it says. And to accept the negative retribution, we need to show only that the defendant has not committed the offense for the offense in the innocence of all three conditions. Fall to satisfy has not be committed crime. Consequently, number one does not hold, and number two, and hence number two and number three are necessarily unsatisfied. Therefore, we can conclude that an innocent person does not deserve to be punished. That is a negative retributionism and correct without endorsing positive retributionism. Whether one considers any versions of retributionism be be it in Hegel's theory. On the unfair advantage theory or Duff's secular Pence theory, one can cast doubt on some steps in their argument, in hence doubt in the conclusion that the criminal deserves to be punished. However, no one should doubt that an innocent person does not deserve to be punished. Finally, let me point out that the criticisms against positive retributivism typically does not apply to negative retributivism. For instance, Hart has argued against positive retributivism on the ground that the two wrongs do not make a right. Scanlon had rejected it because it repelled the repellent to hold that it is a good thing that some people get punished even if there are no good consequences. Wish to point out that their arguments, if successful, would apply only in positive retributivism and not negative retributivism. This means that we can subscribe to negative retributivism without endorsing positive retributivism. The only view that could The only view can possibly, I'll say possibly, it says 9, right? Or is it 10? Yeah, we're gonna read number 10. We're gonna do a part 2 to this. We're gonna get into the mitigation part next Wednesday. I'm gonna schedule on stock because I ain't gonna go read this for a lot of hours. I'm gonna stop it on the last part. And to finally point out the criticism of retribution does not typically negative retribution. For the instance, and against positive retribution, two wrongs don't make a right. Okay, retribution. This means that will subscribe negative retribution without endorsing the positive retribution. Okay. The only view that could possibly undermine negative retributivism in the point, and it means to maintain there's no such thing as extra institutional desert and consequently claim that the innocent person does not make any sense because no desert claim that make any sense. However, this is very effective to accept the Rawls holds that only institutional deserts contrary to Rawls, and it surely makes the sense to say, for instance, this team lost the World Cup final, but deserves to have one. It is extremely unlikely in this statement. The desert refers to pre or extra institutional desert. Okay, I'll give you this. It's only 12 in conclusion. We ain't gonna read 10 to 12. We're gonna get that next week, and I'll find some more of this. We're gonna put this in the chat. So yeah, I appreciate everybody came through. So we're gonna paste this right here, and we're gonna expound on it in a minute. So yeah, it's 12 of these, and it talks about the pickpocket example revisit because we talked about that. I don't know if I'm gonna make a part 2. We'll see, but yeah, it's a long read. We're gonna get to this part next week. Yeah, it's gonna be a part 2. So we gotta see what's going on here. But yeah, that's contractualism and its purest form. We'll do a part 2 and we'll talk about it. Same link, and then I'll find some more about what it says, what it's stated, because Wednesday's gonna be a focus stream. I'm gonna focus on it. And we're gonna talk about it, man. I appreciate everybody came through, but shouts out to everybody. If y'all want to come through and disagree, that's cool because everybody be on that bullshit. We're gonna stick to the topic and we're gonna talk about contractualism and things like that. But the article I just post or the thing is down in the chat if y'all are curious about it. And that's just the thing. And that's just the thing about it. So yeah, this is I think her name is Taylor somethingonline.com, but it's a full article, but it goes into what we're saying. But what we're saying in so many words, this is type of stuff that we see. You know what I mean? And a lot of people just forget about things like that. So we understand what's going on. And that's just how it is, man. Like we're not tripping over here. We're not going crazy and just saying, worrying about one individual acting crazy. That we told them niggas, but we're focused on the real for real. So yeah, man, like we do this. We don't run for nothing. We don't run for nothing over here. So we're gonna talk about it extensively. So you know what I mean? And that's just what it is. So mainly we're back at it. Yeah, get my arm and legs and foot because I know people are gonna be talking. Yeah, I know people gonna watch this on the playback, and I'm not really tripping. So yeah, I do these a lot, and that's just what it is. Like you know, we talk about the actual, the laws, the contract, and it breaks down. It talks about a little bit of utilitarianism. We're gonna break into it more often. So it's 2 hours in. I know people are not gonna come through. I just dropped the link if y'all want to disagree or whatever. We can talk about some more extensively what I just read and things like that in part two. And I think I'll read the same article and we'll talk about it about Rawls and all of them. And it's just basically we're gonna read what's what, and we talked about it in terms, and then we're gonna just fundamentally do it. So, basically we're gonna get into it about what contractualism is in the whole purpose of it, what it was. So, like as I can say, I'm gonna shout out everybody. I shout out Psycho Candy, appreciate you coming through because small crowd. Bruce, appreciate you. Degenerate, as always, please. Yeah, it's only three that came through. All right, shouts out to y'all, man. Like y'all some real ones. And that's it. I sense no one's not coming through, but the link was in the chat if they want to disagree or whatever. If they had any issues what I said, and we'll do a part two to this and we'll be back to it. So with that, I want to say peace and shalom, and I'm out.